Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest John Pierre, known mostly as JP, right? We're going to do that. JP is really very much involved in really sharing this compassionate, loving, plant-exclusive lifestyle and has a long history of being able to working as a motivator and a consultant for many people getting in shape, getting fit. But I like the fact that the focus is not only on personal health, but animal and environmental protection too. He's the author of two books, Pillars of Health, and one called Strong, Savvy, and Safe. And JP, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world, championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of yours.
Well, I'm a big fan of yours, so we got to have a mutual admiration society, which is very cool. I like that. You know, when I see you and I hear you speak, you know, so much of what you're about is really that compassionate, loving part of what this lifestyle truly is at its roots. So my first question to you is, where did that really begin for you? I mean, let's go back into an early part of your story. And what were the motivations or the aha moments in your own life that led you to plant eating and then led you into, you know, this embracing this bigger picture of things? Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So actually, you know, I started this journey I think it's 40 years ago in high school. So senior year in high school, the two reports I did, oral reports standing in front of my, peers, were one was women's rights and the other was animal rights.
Right.
And, 40 years later, those are my two books, one on basically love and compassion and Ahimsa, and the other, Strong, Savvy, Safe, which is based on safety and self-defense for women. So it really just, back in high school, I just saw those as two important causes that weren't getting enough attention. I didn't think women were being treated fairly. And, I just thought they were in society, it just wasn't a fair deal they were getting, the way they were always in this subservient position. And then the same thing with, of course, all the animal abuse that was taking place. And so basically around senior year, when I start understanding and reading more that I was eating animals, in an instant I stopped, because for some reason it took me a long time to figure out that hamburger was actually a cow. And, whatever I was eating at a fast food restaurant was a chicken or a fish. And then once I figured that out, I stopped that immediately. And then I start reading more. And then I start understanding about dairy and the way a cow has to be sexually assaulted to produce milk. And then that her baby is taken from her. That was the end of that. And then, of course, John Robbins' book, Diet for a New America, came out talking more about the environmental devastation. And that even, solidified it more. I didn't get into this necessarily to be a better athlete or anything like that, because back then, 82, 83, that wasn't really so much, the information wasn't there, on how beneficial plant-based diet was to mainstream people. But the ethics was my main concern back then. And once I heard that I was doing something that was harming something, well, then I quit in an instant.
Yeah, so the issues related to personal health, there was no real health issue that you were overcoming. There was no real provocation of something like that, because sometimes that's, people get in for several different reasons, usually personal health or animal rights or environment, but many times it's because of their own disease and disability. That was not the case for you.
Yeah, I was a kid, I'm like 17 or so. So
you were young, yes.
Yeah.
But were you seeing any of that in your own family that would making things click in your mind, that maybe the way people were living could be affecting these crazy health patterns that people were experiencing?
I don't think back then we really were drawing that distinction, maybe a little bit with obesity, but, this was right out of the 70s. So
Right.
people didn't have the same rates of obesity as they do today. And there wasn't as much research. It took me a couple years until I start being able to read some of the hygienic movement, some of their magazines and their periodicals to understand more about the health aspect. But to me, it was I didn't want to cause harm. I wanted to do as little damage and as little harm as I possibly could. So that was my main motivation.
Yeah, and the point you're making is very important. One is that, the same difficulty you had in recognizing that the food, the way it was presented on the plate, was disconnected from the reality of what is. Think about how difficult it is for most Americans when they have no connection to the fact that this is somehow part of a living creature that had to be decimated for this to end up on their plate. And so, and this is one of the problems I have sometimes with some of the regular docs that teach this, because it tends to be a focus on personal health only to a great extent. And that's not a bad thing because it's important. But I think the component of understanding the consequences of what our choices do for things around us, all life around us, is a consequence that we kind of get disengaged from. And I think the fact that your work has centered so much on highlighting that consciousness and that awareness is such a powerful thing. And I think it needs to be done more. I think it needs to be done more by the professionals in the know that are just kind of focusing on health issues only.
I totally agree. And, one of the things I've always said is the vegetarian movement, and even to some extent, the hygiene movement is about me, 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 me. And it's not enough about we. Right. And that we has to be all expressions of life. So I have lots of rescued animals and I have lots of water dishes around, and there's tons and tons of these microscopic fruit flies that get in the water bowl, and they're kind of got their wings out and they look like they're dead. And 20, 30 times a day, I take a little piece of paper, scoop them out, sit it on the counter, and 5 minutes later, they're gone. And that rescue to me of that little fruit fly is just as important as when I'm out rescuing a goose or a duck or whatever, a crow or whatever I'm doing.
Well, JP, that's about as Buddhist as you can get right there. That's amazing, to do that. But it's very real. I mean, it's very real because it is a life form, and all of it is life. And I agree with you.
And it's also being, learning to not be a speciesist.
Right.
So you just see all expressions of life as valuable, and they all have their place in this world, and they all should be cared for. And so that when you have that mindset, it makes making decisions very easy in life.
Right. I'm here with JP. We're going to take just a very short break to hear from our sponsor, the National Health Association, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. Dr. Frank Sabatino here, encouraging you to check out the NHA membership. For just $35 a year in the U.S. and $55 internationally, you'll have access to a wealth of resources, including our quarterly full-color print magazine, Health Science. Stay updated on the latest health tools, inspiring stories, and exclusive events like the NHA Conference and plant-exclusive cruises. Join us at healthscience.org/membership and make a difference in your life and the world. I'm Dr. Frank Sabatino, your host, and now back to the NHA Health Science Podcast, where more exciting insights await you. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm with JP, and we're talking about basically compassion and the core of understanding and the consciousness of looking at the consequences of the things we choose to do and choose to eat. And I think that becomes so even more apparently important now as we look at changes going on in the environment and things that are really a direct byproduct of really the unconsciousness of our behavior in many, many ways. Let me ask you about something else, because I found it interesting. You were so far ahead of the curve in dealing with practices and behaviors that would improve cognitive health. I was looking at some of your brain improvement stuff that you did almost 25 plus years ago. Right. Talk a little bit about the evolution of that, because you were so far ahead of the curve in dealing with cognitive dissonance, and now, of course, what ultimately becomes this pandemic of Alzheimer's and cognitive breakdown. So talk a little bit about how you got into that. What was the motivation for that? And what was the programming that you were actually doing so people can see that?
Yeah, great. I love answering that question. That's a great question. So I started in retirement homes probably over 30 years ago. And all the retirement homes had in my community was basically Banjo Joe. And, they'd sing some songs and that type of stuff and do maybe some knitting classes, right? They
Right.
didn't do anything to help these seniors. Once you hear that word retire, to them, it just meant, doing nothing. So physically, they weren't doing anything. And then mentally, they weren't doing anything. So I had started creating this like brain building university when no one was even talking about it. And I kind of approached it from very similar to my first book, all these different pillars. So the one was plant-based diet. So I would take them on field trips. They have a big bus and we take them to Trader Joe's. I'd make sure they get Ezekiel bread. They got blueberry juice. They got things to supplement their diet with. I had been reading the research way back then about the benefits of blueberries. And,
Right.
it's almost like now they talk about blueberries for the brain as if it's some new research. It's
I
been
know.
known it forever. Enhances neuronal communication, repairs damage to the brain, the polyphenols and the anthocyanins and all that, so protective of the brain. It's almost like putting an umbrella over the brain and protecting it from acid rain. And so I was doing that, trying to work with the cooking staff at the retirement homes to get them more options, more plant-based stuff. Then I approached it from a mental standpoint. So I would teach classes at some of these retirement homes 2 to 3 times a week. And the first thing they would do is they would sit down, pen and pencil. And the first thing I'd say, okay, everybody put that pencil in your opposite hand. And I want you to write your name 10 times for me. And some poor seniors could barely grab the pencil with their opposite hand. And week after week, month after month, many of the seniors were able to replicate their left and right hand equal. It took practice. So we
Right.
did a lot of brain building activities. And then I created a brain building boot camp. I would get an industrial strength bubble machine and put it on wheels, and all the seniors would be around me. I'd be having classical music and they'd all have chopsticks and they had to catch all those different bubbles everywhere. So I was
Huh.
working their balance and developing that neuroplasticity and doing agility ladder drills, different ball exercises, things to get them to react quicker and to stimulate their brain. And then I used some different nutraceuticals back in the days. These were a long time ago. I used
Right.
lecithin for choline for them to create acetylcholine. I used ginkgo biloba back then. So we didn't have the same research that we had maybe as much on nitrates today and, creating nitric oxide and stuff.
Right.
But, I did what I could. And this was, again, kind of the early 80s again.
And in that boot camp, because I know you're such a proponent of physical activity, which we're going to talk about, I'm assuming you were bringing that piece in because a lot of times in those retirement homes, the sedentary behavior is so devastating and destructive. And they really are putting those people in a place where they just feel they just need to vegetate.
Yep.
It's almost like they've given up on
Yep.
them as human beings. And so I love the fact that you were saying, no, that's not the way it is. So were you involved with getting them in ongoing physical movement walking,
Yeah.
whatever you were doing back then? I don't know
I
what you
did
were doing.
lots of classes on fall prevention. So I did a lot of balance and coordination skill. I worked with, Parkinson's support, where I'd always have to have them, even just some people being able to button up their shirt or put on their own makeup is a challenge.
Right.
That little motion, the fine coordination is lost, as you get older if you don't use it. And then, of course, just general, exercise bands and weights and things like that. A lot of ball work. I'm really big into medicine balls as people get older because they lose that explosiveness and that power. And every
Right.
time a medicine ball is hitting their hand, they're building that bone density. So if they do fall, there's a less likely chance they'll fracture the ulnar radius or, their hand, something with their hand. So I was a very big proponent of that. But I only had so much pull in the retirement homes because, they had a budget. And so I'd be lucky if they'd have me, 2 or 3 times a week. But I made my rounds all across Chicago. And then, of course, their retirement homes were they owned properties around the country. So then I'd go out to other properties in different states. So that was really my background. Is most of my work was in with geriatrics, and that's why I still do it today. But unfortunately, I'm doing more work with athletes or celebrities or people just trying to lose weight, and that's good too. But I really have a special place that I like to focus on the seniors because one of the reasons I got into that is because I do feel like the women that I was working with in the women and children shelters and the animals at the shelters. I just feel that the senior population was very neglected. I was teaching the blue zones before there was blue zones, and I was
Right.
explaining to the caregivers that were mainly Filipino that in your community you never put your parents into a retirement home, you live with them. And I was explaining that's one of the healthiest things you can do is to have the grandkids and the kids and the grandparents together in terms of cohesiveness, getting people together, sharing, talking, and teaching children reverence for the elderly, and not seeing as people get older that they're decrepit, they're still a valuable part of this society.
Well, that's such an important point because I think, in some of those indigenous cultures, there's the sense that the elder has something really to offer the
Right.
younger generation because they've got the experience of having lived. And so there's a value in being elderly and feeding back. In our culture, there's that disengagement where that person is put out to pasture.
Yep.
It's funny to me, even now I get this mail every minute talking about ways that I can bury myself. I mean, it's hilarious. It's in the
Yeah.
mail. I get
Yeah.
these cremation letters and it's almost like they find that you're at a certain age and it's almost like trying to write you off instead
Yeah.
of understanding that, wow, that's a resource. Let's take advantage of the experience of that person and feed it back into the younger population, younger generation who can learn from that and possibly benefit in a very positive way. So you're not connected with nursing homes and any of that much anymore. That's not kind of what you're doing.
No, I just don't do as much as I used to. Back then I was retirement homes, senior centers, adult daycare centers. I was doing it all everywhere. And then as I did more work, we get on the vegan circuit and you're at the vegetarian or vegan conferences, animal rights conferences. That takes more time and you're traveling all the time. But no,
Right.
that's still in, I was just emailing a retirement home the other day. So it's still something I love. To me, it's something I cherish. I just want to make sure that these older people get their accurate information because a lot
Right.
of them, like you said, they think, well, when you get to be a certain age, it's time to relax and rest. And my whole philosophy back then was, no, when you retire, you have all this free time now and you have financial resources. I want you vacationing. I want you taking classes. I want you getting engaged in physical activity. I think retirement, that word is a very dangerous
No,
word.
it's hard. It's horrible because it signals you're stopping all vital activity in a way to many people. And then your point
Yeah.
is well made. John, in the book Strong, Savvy, and Safe, talk to me about your motivation to help women protect themselves. That's kind of a very interesting concept that you would write and get into doing an entire book about, protecting the female population. Let's talk a little bit about that. What was the real motivation? What was the driving passion for that?
Well, again, that book in theory was started in high school, senior year, where I did a report on that exact book. And
I
it
see.
took many years for me to put it together completely. But, again, we were seeing back then just women were being constantly abused. I was working in women and children shelters all the time. I brought in so much food, vegan food to them that they said that and all the clothing I'd bring in, they couldn't use. That's how much stuff I was bringing in. And then I would come in and do seminars and talk. And so to me, again, it was a population that was being neglected. They weren't being respected back then. Again, it was, the man earned the money. The woman was supposed to be in the house doing the cleaning and doing that type of stuff. And that just didn't sit right. I just didn't think that was a fair thing. Because again, through veganism and my study of Ahimsa, and that to me is a very important word, that Sanskrit word that, again, compassion and reverence for all beings, all
Right.
expressions of life. I didn't see women as less than. And so I wanted to make sure that as a male, I would go into these, they were children's and women's shelters. I wanted them to see a man in there doing good and then walking out without anything. I wouldn't even interact when I first started. I just bring in the clothes and the food and they'd see me, but I wanted them to know that there are men out there that were good and they weren't abusers. They weren't predators. They saw them and they respected them as equal.
John, as we go on, where can people find you, learn more about you, participate in the things that you're sharing? What's a location they can go to?
Sure. Well, my website is just my name, johnpierre.com. And then my animal sanctuary and my nonprofit is livingwithharmony.org. And that's where they can find me. I have a retreat coming up in Chicago on May 22nd through the 26th.
Oh,
So
beautiful.
it's in a couple months. We still have some spots there.
And what's that retreat involved with? What happens at your retreat?
Yeah, that's a retreat based on both my books. So, we focus very much on hygienic principles. The only thing we don't do is we just don't focus all the time on food. And I think that's a problem, is that, all these conferences are food based, telling us
Yes.
the benefits of kale and brown rice and chia seeds. And I think that's great when you first start out. But
Right.
many of these people, when I go from conference to conference to conference, they're at all the conference. It's like they think it's the Grateful Dead. They're following. You know what I mean? And that's great if you need that to motivate yourself. But a lot of those people I end up doing sessions with, and it's like they never take an action on what they know. It's like they need to take action on what they know. And once they dial in the diet, the basics, let's talk about your sleep. Let's talk about your exposure to
Right.
sunshine.
And
Let's
that's really the beauty of what the Hygiene Society was really about, because it was about those pillars of lifestyle, those biological requirements, and things did get lost in the undertow of, there was a time in my own clinical experience where I stopped lecturing on nutrition for several years because I felt that everyone was just really limiting their possibilities and their perception by focusing only on that. So that's when, for me, the stress component, the emotional poise, issues, the spiritual issues of looking at something bigger than yourself. What are the consequences of these actions affecting the world around you? All of that needs to be part of this health concept. And, for me, it's like those three love affairs I talk about: personal health, protection of animals, and environmental. Those are three love affairs that have to be part of the entire health package. It's funny, the Ahimsa concept is such a powerful concept, and people sometimes get the feeling that it's like a new concept. It goes back like to the ninth century in Southern Asia and some of these cultures. It's a very ancient way of looking at our relationship with the world in such a positive way, in such a nonviolent, supportive, and compassionate way. So I'm happy to see the evolution of that kind of weaving its way into a modern consciousness, but it's a very old traditional concept in a variety of spiritual traditions. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Sanskrit term. And
Right.
originally yoga, I taught in India. And when you go to India, they're like wondering, what are we doing here? What we call yoga, dressed in leotards and stretching. It's like there's the 8 limbs of yoga. And
You mean they're not using Lululemon pants in India, huh? Okay, that's fine.
but ahimsa is really the key 8 of the 8 limbs, do no harm.
Right.
So, you're not really practicing yoga when, you're going out for hamburgers and hot dogs and, abusing animals. And also you're not practicing ahimsa when you're not using words that are based on love and compassion. And I've done sessions with some of the biggest yogis out there, and I had to confront them on it. I said, look, you're out there teaching all this love and compassion and wearing the white robes and Om. And then I'm in your home now, and I'm seeing you drop F-bombs to your kids. And I'm seeing the anger and hostility you have in your relationship with your partner. I said, that's not yoga. That's not the union. And so a lot of people think they're teaching yoga when they're really just teaching stretching or asanas, right? They're not practicing true yoga.
Yeah, these ancient systems have a very deep etched philosophical, spiritual tradition. But, as we get into the West, we get lost in just the motion of the process. So we want to learn the form or the steps of the movement, but, without getting into the crux of, what's really behind that? What's the real motivation for the process? And so I love what you just said about all of that. I got to touch on something else. I didn't realize it when I went through, learning a little bit more about you and looking at your website. I had no idea how much you were the fitness and motivational component to the stars. So let's talk a little bit about that. These people with great publicity, these very famous people in the world of sports and entertainment. How did you segue yourself into really the lives of those people? How did that, talk a little bit about the path to that? Because, we had on your site, you've got Joaquin Phoenix and Ellen DeGeneres, and you got musicians like Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. You got Pamela Anderson and other people, in addition to, more regular people without that notoriety. But how did you find your way into the lives of those people? How did that happen?
Well, again, I think, I was known in the vegan community, and I was known, the fitness community is another community. So I was known, with these things. And then when I started doing some work in Los Angeles, people who I was helping a lot of people, and they just had through time just introduced me to some of their friends who happen to be celebrities, and it just kind of took off from there. But they're no different than you or I. They have the fame, and they have, maybe they have more money and everything, but their programs that I do with them are this, pretty much there's no secrets. Like, I don't do anything different with them that I don't do with others. They have a little bit better budget, and they have the ability to see me on a more regular basis. But
Right.
what they do have, I will say, is, they do have a lot of challenges with, they're always in the limelight, and they're always having a lot of things thrown at them in terms of opportunities and money and things like that. And they're always having a lot of pressure and stress. So they do need, not that they're any more working harder than any other person like you or I, but they do have to watch what they're exposing themselves to in terms of stress, because a lot of them don't sleep well. They're touring, they're in concerts all the time. Even athletes, they're constantly subjecting their body to trauma. And if they don't recover properly, then that leads to problems. So my job is to kind of help correct that and see some of those issues. But that's just, a lot of people do focus on that. I do work with them or have worked with them. And I'm glad that you highlighted my geriatric work, because that's what I really like to be known for. But
Yeah, it was just a curiosity to me because, getting your foot even in the door with those people had to be kind of an interesting process in itself. And then I'm assuming that, word of mouth becomes a big piece, that you work with somebody and they're so, and the testimonials of those people, and people will see this if they go online anyway, were so glowing about, your involvement with them, and the fact that what the common denominator was basically your heart and your compassion, and how, dedicated you are to that part of this dance. And it affected them and in a very positive way, and made them, want to work more and more with you, because as you say, they live in a world where in a way you're a little bit under a microscope all the time. I wouldn't particularly like it, where, your every move can be scrutinized, and all of a sudden it becomes in media. It has to be somewhat overwhelming at times when you go through that dance,
Yeah, Frank, you're right. I remember once I was out to eat with a celebrity, and when I left, I led the way. So I opened the doors this way, and I'm not kidding you. As soon as I opened the doors, they didn't even know me, but the paparazzi, probably 6 or 8, and the flashes were so bright. It was
Right.
almost like an atomic bomb going off, and they didn't stop. And obviously they weren't looking for me. They're looking for my client.
Of
But
course.
imagine having that all the time and being followed around, and, your agents are calling you left and right. It's like, it's not that their stress is necessarily different than yours or somebody else's, but it's a little different. And I think it weighs on their psyche a lot. And they kind of, I think personally, a lot of, in that time, you lose yourself. And I think
And
that's,
also with the ego, I mean, sometimes you've got to really resist believing your own press,
yeah,
because you know what I mean. That stuff can can blow that ego part up to such a degree that in a way you've got to come back to earth, no matter who you are, no
yeah.
matter how successful you are, because if you don't, you lose connection. You lose connection with what's real and what's important in many ways. And so I could see where that can lead to a wide range of stresses and even a wide range of addictions, which sometimes happens in that population of people, to find some comfort in the
Yeah.
face of that, overwhelming scrutiny.
Yeah, and they meet me and they see, somebody who's kind of living the way I am. And, I remember one celebrity said to me, a major celebrity asked me if I ever watched him on TV. And I said, well, I don't have a TV. They thought it was crazy. They said, well, I'm going to buy you a TV and a TiVo. And I said, well, what's a TiVo? And they said, that's how you record the shows. I said, I'm okay. I don't need that.
Yeah,
And they just thought that was so strange.
you've lived long enough without it. That's fine.
Yeah.
So let's talk about really one of your main babies, one of your biggest passions, and that is your nonprofit, Living with Harmony. Let's talk about how that came to be. What was the journey to wanting that to happen, and let's talk about the message and what that means to you and what it means to you and the world. Let's talk about that.
Right. And my nonprofit, I co-founded with Andrea Rose, and she was a longtime vegan animal activist and environmentalist. And we were friends, and we just thought, like, gosh, we see the world different than everyone else. We need to get this information out there. So we just decided, let's form our own organization. And so we coined a term, not that we need more terms, but called planet-based living. So it
I
was
love it. And by the way, I love that. It was the first time that I saw that on your site, and I said, what a fantastic, what a fantastic phrase, because that's really what it's about.
Yeah, exactly. And plant-based living is really what old school veganism is about. When somebody says they're vegan, and I'm not making a judgment, I'm just trying to be accurate, they really, most of the people who say they're vegan are just plant-based from a diet perspective.
Right.
Eat a plant-based diet at best. But veganism is more of a way of living, and I'm not saying it's a religion, but it's quite a way of living, and it's kind of a code of conduct.
Right.
And so plant-based living was kind of like that. And it just took it a little further, because one of the things our organization tries to do is we try to get people to stop using single-use plastics. And so I cannot tell you how the environmental movement, the people who have been the mover and shakers for 20 something years, we've been talking about this forever. And finally, the scientists are starting to say, hey, you know what? We're finding plastic in freshly fallen snow in the Arctic. This is starting to be omnipresent everywhere. We're starting to see that people are eating about a credit card of plastic a week, 52 credit cards a year, because all their food is with plastic. And so I really try hard to get people to, like when I travel, I brought some of the foods I travel, but like I'll, use these silicone bags.
Right.
I use a compostable bag. So this isn't a Ziploc plastic, it's compostable. So when I travel, like this is, Brazil nuts and walnuts and pecans. When I'm done with this, I just keep using it. And when it gets a hole in it and I can't use it anymore, I can compost it. But every time you drink out of your water bottle and a minute later you're done and you throw it away, well, there is no away. That's going in a landfill. And only about 9% of the plastic gets recycled. Asia is not taking our plastic anymore. They refuse to. They have their own issues with plastic. So we send it to other countries where they just burn it and just put the plastic back into the atmosphere. And, I've worked at some schools where I volunteered, and I said to the janitors, because I used to help the janitors because they were exposed to a lot of chemicals and poor lifestyle. So I'd work with them for free, and they got to know me. And I said, I really love all these recycling bins you have here. I want to thank you guys for doing. They said, JP, can we tell you something? I said, sure. They said, we just take all that recycling and dump it in the garbage.
Oh.
So, people mean well because they think they're recycling, but we don't forget recycling. Just stop buying plastic and don't try to recycle. Now, obviously, there's some things that are going to have plastic. Like I have a company called Ridwell that they give me this huge metal box and they come to the house twice a month, and they'll pick up any tiny little pieces of plastic. Or like if I go to a conference and somebody gives me a nutrition bar in the wrapper, I don't throw it out. I just save it, because they turn that stuff into Trex decking. They make school, playground grounds with it and things like that. So our organization is really big on doing that. We collect plastic and styrofoam from the community, and then we pay to have that properly recycled where we know it's getting recycled. So we do things like that. We do lots of animal rescue, of course. And then we're just out at the farmers markets and schools and doing lectures on plant-based living. And the core of plant-based living, again, is Ahimsa, being kind and compassionate to all expressions of life. And when you go into schools, we show them a lot of different video clips and things of what's happening. And the kids, quite honestly, are shocked. They just never knew that these things were occurring, and they're very receptive to it. And then we bring in vegan food for them to try and to turn them on to that.
Where is that, JP? Where is all that happening?
That's in Colorado.
In Colorado.
Yeah.
So in your animal sanctuary, how is that evolving in terms of the animals you're rescuing? Is that expanding? Is that growing? What's happening with that?
Yeah, we're fundraising constantly to try to get a large property with a couple acres, because right now we're rescuing animals that we will keep. We don't like give them away, for somebody. They're ones that are missing a wing, or the cat is paralyzed and she has to have her bladder manually expressed 3 times a day. So we take in ones that nobody else really would deal with, because my co-founder is a vet technician, so she can handle, doing that stuff. And then
how much land is your sanctuary? How big is it?
Well, no, we don't have it now. We just have all the animals in a small area.
Oh, I see. So you're looking to be able to get that a little bit more expanded too, probably.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Because then we can rescue some larger animals, and then we can run retreats there, which is our goal, to do more like hygienic, natural hygiene type retreats.
Absolutely. Where is the retreat being run in Chicago? Where do you do it?
That's at a place called St. Mary's, which is a monastery where the priests and nuns go to school. So it's like cool. 1,000-acre property that's right in the middle of the woods. So there's deer and wildlife and a giant lake. And it's nice because it's all SOS free, obviously cooking. And then it's not based on nutrition. I do maybe 2 lectures, one on food addiction and one on fine tuning the vegan diet. And the rest is we bring in a trauma therapist. So we focus a lot on dealing with trauma. This year, we're bringing in somebody who is a criminal psychologist and was in the Secret Service, and they're doing a class on resilience and then developing resilience. And then we're bringing in the food monk, who's going to be talking about spirituality connected to food. And then I do lots of different exercise classes and classes on developing morning and evening rituals. I do a lot of focus on breathing and, developing a calm state, because my goal when I work with clients is to help them have this calm, steady brain instead of this roller coaster. And so I think, by using some ancient modalities, just like you're familiar with Tai Chi and a lot of different martial arts and breathing modalities and essential oils, aromatherapy, those are very important components to healing and stabilizing, erratic brain functioning.
People don't realize the power in breath work. It is just really one of the most dynamic, and because it's a primal function, if you think about it, the most important nutrition is nutrient is oxygen. You can go a long time without food. We fast people 30, 40 days, but you can't go a few minutes without oxygen. So the way we do that has such an impact on our psychological and emotional state. So that's powerful. How many people come to your retreat? What's the number?
Very small. We have a maximum of about 60 because it's a retreat and we keep it intimate and we want you to spend time with the instructors and me. We want you to be with us all the time.
Did you say 16 or 60?
It's 60.
Oh, that's not that. That's a pretty good size retreat. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Well,
but you got a lot of staff too that's helping out with all that too.
Well, yeah, and nobody gets paid. I don't get paid. None of the volunteers get paid. If there's money over, if we earn anything, which we hope, but if we do, it just goes directly to my sanctuary. We don't.
So it goes into the nonprofit basically, is where all of that is at. That's fantastic. That's wonderful.
It's just a way for us to teach. To get this information out, it's a passion like you've had. You've been vegan for since 1977?
In the 70s, yeah. I tell people, the last burger that I had was 1971. And I tell people that, and they look at me like, can you say that again?
Yeah.
Now, that was in a transition place, so there was still a little dairy that crept in. So usually by the mid to later 70s, it was complete. Because that's when I was running the Shangri-La Natural Hygiene Institute, which was a crazy place in itself because it had 110 people a week, and it was only $300 a week back then. And we would have 50 to 60 water fasters at the same time. Yeah. And I was the only person monitoring. I was in my late 20s. It was a crazy time, but it was a fantastic experience. But yeah, so that goes back into the 70s. But you were right after that, early 80s and all that. The big point, though, for everybody is start wherever you can. Just get started, just consciously get started. Let's go back to that plastic thing, because you had that company that comes and picks up plastic and all of that. How pervasive is that across the country? Because, obviously it's a big country where you need that kind of service, but that's only one organization. How much of that is reaching out into all the principalities of the United States?
Yeah, and that's a good point. What they do is when you go onto their website, it's called Ridwell, you punch in your zip code and they see if they have enough interest to have their service out there. But the more people that say, hey, I want you here, then that's how they get there. Wow. But I think the secret, Frank, is we don't want to recycle. We should be doing it like maybe you did.
Like you said, just avoiding this use. Absolutely.
Yeah. I use so when I brought some when I use a green powder, I buy it in glass. Right. So one of the reasons is I want to support a company that is saying, hey, look, we pack everything in glass because of the environment. It costs us more money and it costs more to ship, but we're doing the right thing. And so I just support companies like this. And then you can use these glass containers. You just, you don't even have to clean them, but you can take the label off and then just store your carrots in here. You can store
you can store anything. You can store legumes. You can store anything in there, whatever.
Anything, and just keep using it. I use their travel sizes, and then I can just reuse these. I can put my chia seed or flax seed in here when I travel. I just keep reusing the bottles over and over.
It's perfect.
I have a water filter. It's called Clearly Filtered. So when I'm at the airport, I just put my water, get under the spigot, and it takes out 350 different contaminants. I never
Beautiful.
have to buy a plastic bottle. So you do the best you can. But look, sometimes you might get plastic, but you're trying to do the right as much as you can. Like,
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
it's not hard to take your bag shopping to a farmer's market and then just use that. You don't need to snap off one of their plastic bags.
Right.
Bring your own bag. You're going to wash it anyhow. So it's like, you don't even need a bag. You could carry it if you want. But
Yeah.
little things like that, to me, Frank, that are the core of hygiene. It's like, it can't just be about diet and fitness and sunlight. That's great at first. But then what are you doing for humanity? What are you doing for Mother Nature? When I go to somebody's house, if I'm staying as a guest, well, I don't leave the house in a mess. I take care of it, right?
Right.
Same thing here. Mother Nature.
Think about 50 to 100 million people making those small changes. How incredible that would be as a sum total of an outcome. It would be unbelievable. You know what I mean? It'd be amazing transformation.
Every time I travel, and if I'm in a hotel, first thing I do is I find the staff in the hallway, and they say, I don't need my room cleaned. I can do that myself. And then when I leave, I take my sheets off, the pillowcases off. I make sure the bathroom looks clean. Everything looks nice. I actually don't take my garbage if I have garbage, because I take stuff to recycle. So if there's paper or something, I take it with me because I know it's not going to get recycled. And I don't want them to take that plastic bag again and put a new one in there for one piece of trash.
Right.
And so I try to do that, because to me, that's ahimsa. That's thinking about the person going to clean your room. Can you give them a break? They're taking care of their kids and they're working 2 jobs. Can I make it easier for them so they don't have to work as hard?
And that's also making the effort in things like clothing, upholstery, all of that. I have to be professional, but all of my shoes, belts, clothes are all vegan products. And so making those steps, I was talking with Sailesh Rao. He made the point that we're using about 280 million pounds of animal parts to just do clothing, shoes, and accessories. If you think about that, it's just so mind-boggling and unconscionable. And so much of that now is available too. So, that mentality, understanding that it goes beyond just the food, it goes into all facets of the things we have to do socially in our lives. And that's very, very powerful too.
Even just shopping at a thrift store. So basically, I get most everything from the thrift store. One, it's gassed out. So in other words, you buy new clothing, all those chemicals are leaching out. You're breathing.
Right.
And many of them contain plastic. And number 2, I don't want to support those industries, because when they're done with their clothing for the year, they dump it. They literally just dump it in landfills. And so I prefer to get used products as much as I can. There's something called planned obsolescence. And that's, you remember when you were a kid, you had a refrigerator forever. And now they don't make them that way. They make them planned obsolescence. They make them to break. And then you have to buy a new one, just like
and that's true. And that's true with everything: computers, laptops, phones, all of it.
Apple had a huge lawsuit about that, and consumers were getting money back because when companies make things to break, how do you get those heavy those are conflict minerals in these phones and computers. They're using caustic chemicals to extract that, and they're using child labor. So you have to take in those things in account. Cotton is one of the most heavily laden crops in the world with pesticides. So when you buy cotton, try to support a company that has organic cotton, or buy just used clothes.
Right. So are you going to be at the conference this year? You're going to be offering what you do?
Yeah, I'll be teaching. Sure.
You'll be teaching and doing fitness and all that. So let's talk about that just briefly, because I know you've been such a beautiful mainstay at those conferences, at the NHA conferences. And I just wanted people to know that you were going to be there again. So talk just briefly about what the NHA means to you, because, you're committing your time to them. So what does it really mean to you?
I tell you, when I think of the NHA, I think of the pioneers that go back. I think Mark had gone to like his first conference, and what was it, like 1951 or 52? Mark.
He went to conferences before there was colored television sets. Yeah. Think about that.
So, him and Wanda have done an amazing job of taking over and just running such an amazing show there, and all the speakers that come in. Of course, like, I don't know, is there anyone who's done this as long as you, Frank? You talk about pioneers.
I'm probably, of the docs, I'm probably the oldest, because even Joel Furman, Alan, they came a little. I was lecturing at the conferences when Alan was still a student.
That's amazing.
That's how he had his Sprout business in the Northwest back then.
Yeah.
And he used to come to, so yeah. So really, because a lot of the guys and women, the men and women that influenced, me and Joel and Alan and all of that, many of them have passed away. So we're kind of the new vanguard of the older people, Alan and Joel and me. So yeah, I'm probably, of the docs, I've become the elder statesman now, so to speak.
I was so excited because I got to teach at your place in Florida. I got a ride from Dr. Goldhammer and Dr. Lyle, and I just thought like you were the bomb. You were everything. So I was just excited to get to see you.
Well, I'm glad you're going to be at the conference this summer, and I look forward to tapping in with you again. So as we wind this down, JP, do you have any final words you'd like to share with the audience out here?
Yep, I think the most important thing is for everybody that's following this hygienic lifestyle, keep doing, what you're doing with the fine tuning your diet and lifestyle, but start thinking a little bit more about the love and compassion, and start with your words. I've always said that sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can tear your heart apart. And they're kind of like an arrow. Once an arrow is released, you don't call it back. It doesn't come back. It's not like a guided missile from the military. It can't self-explode. And so be very conscientious of the words that you release from your mouth. Make sure they're ones that are based on love. They're kind, they're supportive, they're encouraging. Make sure that you're thinking of these words more as healthy foods and medicine going out to try to help heal somebody and not hurt somebody. And then just as cautiously, be careful of the words that you let into your fertile garden. When you're listening to the news and the media and everything's negative and violent, we watch these violent shows where people are getting shot and beaten up, and we think nothing of it. We just pop another cashew in our mouth or take a bite of fruit, and we're watching these crazy shows.
Right.
It's like, that is not good for your psyche. I mean, that is one of the most dangerous things we can do. So I'd say that's one of the main things, is just be more conscientious of, being a good steward of humanity and the animals and the planet, and be careful of the words and all the little actions you have, because every time you vote with your dollar to buy a product or support a movie or a book or an author, you're supporting that energy. So just make sure it's the right energy that you really want to support.
Well, I can't thank my guest today, JP, enough, John Pierre, for sharing his heart, his insight, just really sharing his life with us, and some of the really positive ways that we can really improve how we make choices in the world and understand the consequences and how they affect all life around us. And that's such an important consciousness to have. I urge you to follow JP. You can see his location in the show notes going across. Follow him to get more information about what he's doing or supporting what he's doing. And I want to thank those of you that have joined us today, because without you, we can't do what we do. And I really want to thank you for being part of this really active and healthy community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.